Welcome to Twas 5 Miles Radio, fertile ground for conversations worth listening to and remembering. I'm your host, James Nave, always airing first on WPVM-LP Asheville 103.7 and streaming online, WPVM-FM.org, the voice of Asheville, heard all over the world, and on other community radio stations like KCEI, Cultural Energy Radio, out of Taos, New Mexico. Thank you, Walter Parks, for our theme song. WalterParks.com for more on Walter's music. Davine Dial, thank you for managing WPVM-FM in Asheville, and Robin Collier for doing the same, KCEI Radio in Taos, New Mexico. I really appreciate it. You can always reach me, Navé, at jamesnave.com. I'm airing this show just before Christmas 2024, the weekend before Christmas, and as usual, every year at this time, I perform A Child's Christmas in Wales for folks who like to hear it. And even though it's the same poem every year, it's always different. So I'm going solo today. I'll have more guests in 2025. So today I would like to offer you my gift of A Child's Christmas in Wales, along with some other poems that I've done over the years that have a Christmas theme. And we'll just do the whole hour around poetry and thoughts of the holidays, of Christmas, of the season, of the wintertime, that sort of thing. Although I will tell you, I am recording this in Manila, Christmas in Manila. And you may be wondering, has Manila ever seen a flake of snow? And the answer is absolutely not. The lowest recorded temperature in Manila, 59.1 degrees Fahrenheit, recorded in 1917. So no snow in Manila. Even so, there's a big Christmas season here. People love Christmas in Manila. So I'm here celebrating it. And A Child's Christmas in Wales, of course, has plenty of snow in it. And some of the other poems that I'll do will have a little bit of snow in them too. So when you listen to A Child's Christmas in Wales, here are some of the things you need to know. The story is about a man remembering back to his childhood. The man is telling a boy, maybe at a family gathering, he's telling the boy about his life when he was growing up in Wales during the 1930s. The boy is listening, and the man is trying to remember everything. And if you've ever tried to remember back into 2 decades or 3 decades ago, if you've lived that long, or if you've only lived for 2 decades, you try to remember back 1 decade, the memories are clear, and yet they're often quite fuzzy. So in A Child's Christmas in Wales, the man dances between these very strong memories of all of these great times and still trying to remember, because he can't quite exactly remember what happened, and he's fine with that. It's also a piece about the struggles you would have encountered in Wales in the 1930s. Working class, coal mining, all kinds of industry. So people worked hard, some had money, a lot of them did not, but they made do. They had their Christmases, and they also had all of the experiences around Christmas. One scene in this is important. The boy, or the man who is remembering being a boy, goes out and scours the swathed town for all sorts of things and sees all of this stuff going on Christmas morning. And as he's returning home, he passes by a window or a sheet of ice, something that gives back his reflection. And he doesn't recognize himself. He thinks it's somebody else that looks like him, but it's not him. So he gets into this conflict with his shadow or his reflection, which is part of what happens when you remember things. It's a bit of a tension, a bit of a conflict between the way you think you remember it, and then maybe the way you remember it, or for that matter, somebody who was with you remembering back to the same time might have a completely different take, or no memory at all, even though you remember that person being there in a very prominent sort of way. So that's one thing you need to know. And then the other thing that's in play here, there's a dialogue between the boy and the man. And before the story starts, previous circumstances, as I said, a family gathering. Young lad, maybe 12, 13 years old, approaches the grandfather or the uncle and says, Can you tell me about what it was like when you were growing up?" And the uncle, or the grandfather, settles back and very happily, because he loves to be asked, tells the tall tale or tells the tale to the boy. So A Child's Christmas in Wales begins on the afternoon of the day of Christmas Eve, and it arcs through Christmas morning, Christmas Day, Christmas afternoon, all the way into Christmas night, and it closes. So here is A Child's Christmas in Wales by Dylan Thomas, and this is how I have it memorized this year, 2024. I first performed it in 1991 in a movie theater parking lot in Greensboro, North Carolina, while a friend of mine and I were waiting to go see Fried Green Tomatoes. We had arrived early, had a bit of time. I said, well, since we don't have anything else to do, and I just memorized A Child's Christmas in Wales, it took me nearly a year to get it down. I said, would you like to hear it? And she said, sure, I would love to hear it. So I performed it for her for the first time. And now, 2024, long ways from 1991, here we are again. A Child's Christmas in Wales by Dylan Thomas. One Christmas was so much like another in those years around the Seatown corner. Now, they're out of all sound, except for the distant speaking of the voices I sometimes hear a moment before sleep. I can never remember whether it snowed for 6 days and 6 nights when I was 12, or whether it snowed for 12 days and 12 nights when I was 6. All of the Christmases rolled down toward the two-tongued sea, like a cold and headlong moon bundling down the sky. Well, that was our street. And they stop at the rim of the ice-edged, fish-freezing waves. I plunge my hands into the snow, and I bring out whatever I can find. In goes my hand into that wool-white bell-tongued ball of holidays resting at the rim of the carol-singing sea. And out come Mrs. Prothero and the fireman. It was on the afternoon of the day of Christmas Eve, and I was in Mrs. Prothero's garden waiting for cats with her son, Jim. It was snowing. Well, it was always snowing at Christmas. December, in my memory, is white as Lapland. Though there were no reindeer, but there were cats. Patient, cold, and callous, our hands wrapped in socks. We waited to snowball the cats, sleek and long as jaguars, horrible, whiskered, spitting and snarly. They would slide and sidle over the white-backed garden walls, and the lynx-eyed hunters, Jim and I, fur captain moccasin trappers from Hudson Bay, while we were off Mumbles Road, would hurl our deadly snowballs at the green of their eyes. The wise cats never appeared. We were so still, Eskimo-footed Arctic marksmen in the muffling silence of eternal snows. Well, it was eternal ever since Wednesday. That we never heard Mrs. Prothero's first cry from her igloo at the bottom of the garden, or if we heard it at all, it was to us like the far-off challenge of our enemy and prey, the neighbor's polar cat. But soon, the voice grew louder. "Fire!" cried Mrs. Prothero as she beat the dinner gong. And we ran down the garden with the snowballs in our arms toward the house. And smoke indeed was pouring out of the dining room, and the gong was bombulating, and Mrs. Prothero was announcing ruin. It was like a town crier in Pompeii. This was better than all the cats in Wales standing on the wall in a row. We bounded into the house, laden with snowballs, and stopped at the open door, of the smoke-filled room. Something was burning all right. Perhaps it was Mr. Prothero, who always slept there after midday dinner with a newspaper over his face. But he was standing in the middle of the room, saying, "A fine Christmas," and smacking at the smoke with his slipper. "Call the fire brigade," cried Mrs. Prothero as she beat the dinner gong. "Well, they won't be there," said Mr. Prothero. "It's Christmas." There was no fire to be seen, only clouds of smoke, and Mr. Prothero standing in the middle of them, waving his slipper as though he were conducting. "Do something," he cried. So we threw all our snowballs into the smoke. I think we missed Mr. Prothero. And then we bounded out of the house to the telephone box. "Oh, let's call the police as well," Jim said, "and the ambulance. And Ernie Jenkins, he likes fires." But we only called the fire brigade. And soon the fire engine came, and 3 tall men in helmets brought a hose into the house. Mr. Prothero got out just in time before they turned it on. Nobody could have had a noisier Christmas Eve. And after they turned off the hose and were standing in the middle of the wet, smoky room, Jim's aunt, Miss Prothero, came downstairs and peered in at them. Now, Jim and I, we waited very quietly to hear what she would say to them because, well, she said the right thing always. She looked at the 3 tall men in their shining helmets standing among the smoke, the cinders, and the dissolving snowballs, and she said, "Would you like anything to read?" Years and years ago, when I was a boy and there were wolves in Wales, and birds the color of red flannel petticoats whisked past the harp-shaped hills, and we sang and wallowed all day and all night in caves that smelt like Sunday afternoons and damp front farmhouse parlors, and we chased with the jawbones of deacons the English and the bears. Before the motor car, before the wheel, and before the Duchess-faced horse, when we rode the daft and happy hills bareback, it snowed and it snowed. But here, a small boy says, "Well, it snowed last year too, and I made a snowman and my brother knocked it down, and then I knocked my brother down, and then we had tea." But that is not the same snow, I say. Our snow was not only shaken from the whitewashed buckets down the sky, it came shawling out of the ground and swam and drifted from the arms and the hands and the bodies of the trees. Snow grew overnight on the roofs of houses like a pure and grandfather moss, minutely white-ivied the walls, and settled on the postman, opening the gate like a dumb, numb thunderstorm of white, torn Christmas cards. Well, were there postmen then, too? With sprinkling eyes and wind-cherried noses on spread frozen feet, they crunched up to the doors and mittened on them manfully. But all that the children could hear was the ringing of bells. "Oh, you mean the postman went rat-a-tat-tat and the doors rang?" "No, I mean the bells the children could hear were inside them." "Well, I only hear thunder sometimes. I never hear bells." "Well, there were church bells, too." "Inside them?" No. In the bad black snow-white belfries, tugged by bishops and storks. And they rang their tidings over the bandaged town, over the frozen foam of the powder and the ice cream hills, over the crackling sea. And it seemed that all of the churches boomed for joy under my window. and the weathercocks crew for Christmas on our fence. Well, get back to the postman. They were just ordinary postmen, fond of walking and dogs and Christmas and the snow. They knocked on the doors with blue knuckles. Oh, well, ours has got a black knocker. They stood on the white welcome mats in the little drifted porches and huffed and puffed, making ghost with their breaths, and jogged from foot to foot like small boys wanting to go out. And then the presents. Then the presents, after the Christmas box, and the cold postman with the rose on his button nose tingled down the tea-tray slithered run of the chilly glinting hill. He went in his ice-bound boots like a man on fishmonger slabs. He wagged his bag like a frozen camel's hump. He dizzily turned the corner on one foot, and by God, he was gone. Well, go on to the presents. There were the useful presents, engulfing mufflers of the old coach days, mittens made for giant sloths, zebra scarves made of a substance like silky gum that could be tug-of-warred down to the galoshes, blinding tam-o'-shanters, patchwork tea cozies, bunny-suited busbies, and balaclavas for victims of head-shrinking tribes, and from aunts who always wore wool next to the skin, there were mustached and rasping vests that made you wonder why the aunts had any skin left at all. And once there was a little crocheted nose bag from an aunt, alas, now no longer whinnying with us. And pictureless books in which small boys, though warned with quotations not to, would skate on Farmer Giles's pond, and when they did, they drowned. And books that told me everything about the wasp, except why. Well, go on to the useless presents. Bags of moist and many-colored jelly babies, a folded flag, a false nose, a tram conductor's cap, a machine that punched tickets and rang a bell, was never a catapult, and once, by mistake, which no one could explain, a little hatchet, and a celluloid duck that made, when you pressed it, a most unduck-like sound, a mewing moo that an ambitious cat might make who wished to be a cow, and a painting book in which I could make the grass, the sky, the trees, and the sea any color I pleased. And still, the dazzling sky blue sheep were grazing in the red fields under the rainbow-billed and pea-green birds. Hard-boils, toffee, fudge, all sorts, crunches, cracknels, glaciers, marzipan, and butter Welsh for the Welsh, and troops of bright tin soldiers, who if they could not fight, they could always run, and snakes in families, and happy ladders, and easy hobby games for little engineers, complete with instructions. Well, it was easy for Leonardo, and a whistle to make the dogs bark, to wake up the old man next door, to make him beat on his wall with a stick and knock our picture off the wall, and a packet of candy cigarettes. You put one in your mouth, and you stood on the corner and waited for hours in vain for an old lady to come by and scold you for smoking a cigarette. And then, with a smirk, you ate it. And then it was breakfast, under the balloons. Oh, well, were there uncles like at our house? Well, there are always uncles at Christmas, always the same uncles. And on Christmas mornings, with dog-disturbing whistle and sugar fags, I would go out and scour the swathed town for news of the little world, and find always a dead bird by the white post office, or the deserted swings, perhaps a robin, all but one of his fires out. Men and women wading or scooping back from chapel with taproom noses and wind-bust cheeks, all albinos, would huddle their stiff black jarring feathers against the irreligious snows. Mistletoe hung from the gas brackets in all of the front parlors. There was walnuts and sherry and bottled beer and crackers by the dessert spoons, and cats in their furabouts watched the fires, and the high heap fire spat, all ready for the chestnuts and the mulling pokers. Some few large men, uncles, almost certainly sat in the front parlors trying their new cigars, holding them judiciously out at arm's length, returning them to their mouths, and then holding them out again as though waiting for the explosion. Some few small aunts, not wanted in the kitchen, or anywhere else for that matter, sat on the very edges of their chairs, poised and brittle, afraid to break, like faded cups and saucers. Not many those mornings trod the piling streets. An old man, always fawn-bowlered and yellow-gloved, and at this time of year with spats of snow, would take his constitutional to the white bowling green and back, as he would take it wet or fine on Christmas Day, or on Doomsday. Sometimes 2 hale young men, their big pipes blazing, no overcoats, and wind-blown scarves, would trudge unspeaking down to the forlorn sea to work up an appetite, to blow away the fumes. Who knows? To walk into the waves until nothing of them was left but the 2 curling smoke clouds of their inextinguishable briars. And then I would be slapdashing home. The gravy smell of the dinners of others, the bird smell, the pudding and mince curling up to my nostrils, when out of a snow-clogged side lane would come a boy, the spit of myself, with a pink-tipped cigarette and a violet past of a black eye, leering all to himself, cocky as a bullfinch. I hated him on sight and sound, and I would be about to put my dog whistle to my lips and blow him off of the face of Christmas, when suddenly he, with a violent wink, put his whistle to his lips, and he blew so high, so stridently, so exquisitely loud, that gobbling faces, their cheeks bulged with goose, pressed against the tinseled windows, the whole length of the white echoing street. For dinner, we had turkey and blazing pudding. And after dinner, the uncles sat in the front parlors, loosened all buttons, placed their large moist hands over their watch chains, groaned a little, and slept. The mothers, sisters, and aunts scuttled to and fro, bearing tureens. Auntie Bessie, who had already been frightened twice by a clockwork mouse, whimpered by the sideboard and had some elderberry wine. The dog was sick. Auntie Dozy had to have 3 aspirin, but Auntie Hannah, who liked port, stood in the middle of the snowbound backyard, singing like a big bosom thrush. I would blow up balloons to see how big they would blow up to. And when they burst, which they all did, the uncles jumped and rumbled. In the rich and heavy afternoon, the uncles breathing like dolphins and the snow descending, I would sit among festoons and Chinese lanterns and nibble dates and try to make a model man of war following instructions for little engineers and produce what might be mistaken for a seagoing tram car. Or I would go out, my bright boots squeaking into the white world, onto the seaward hill to call on Jim and Dan and Jack to plod through the still streets, leaving huge, deep footprints on the hidden pavements. Well, I'll bet people will think they've been hippos. Well, what would you do if you saw a hippo coming down our street? Well, I'd go like this, bang, and I would throw him over the railing, and I would roll him down the hill, and I would tickle him under his ear, and he would wag his tail. Well, what would you do if you saw two hippos? Iron-flanked and bellowing he-hippos clanked and battered toward us as we passed Mr. Daniel's house. Let's post Mr. Daniel a snowball in his letterbox. Oh, let's write things in the snow. Let's write, Mr. Daniel looks like a spaniel, all over his front lawn. Or we walked on the white shore. Can the fishes see it snowing? The silent, one-clouded heavens drifted onto the sea, and now we were snow-blind travelers, lost on the North Hills, and the vast dewlap dogs, with flasks around their necks, ambled and shambled up to us, baying Excelsior. We returned home through the still streets, where only a few small children fumbled with bare red fingers in the wheel-rutted snow, and cat-called after us, their voices fading away as we trudged uphill into the cries of the dock birds and the hooting of ships out in the whirling bay. At tea, the recovered uncles would be jolly. The ice cake loomed in the center of the table like a marble grave, and Auntie Hannah laced her tea with rum because it was only once a year. Bring out the tall tales now, we told by the fire as the gaslight bubbled like a diver. Ghosts whooed like owls in all of the long nights when I dared not look over my shoulder. Animals lurked in the cubbyhole under the stairs where the gas meter ticked. And I remember we went singing carols once when there wasn't a shaving of the moon to light the flying street. At the end of a long road was a drive that led to a large house, and we stumbled up the darkness of the drive that night, each one of us afraid, each one of us holding a stone in his hand, in case, and all of us too brave to say a word. The wind through the trees made noises as of old and unpleasant, and maybe web-footed men wheezing in caves. We reached the black bulk of the house. "Oh, what shall we give them?" Jim said. "Hark the herald?" No, Jack said. "Good King Wenceslas. I'll count 3. 1, 2, 3. And we began to sing, our voices high and seemingly distant in the snow-felted darkness around the house, occupied by nobody we knew. We stood close together near the dark door. "Good King Wenceslas, look out on the feast of Stephen." And then a small, dry voice, like the voice of someone who had not spoken in a long time, joined our singing. A small, dry, eggshell voice from the other side of the door, a small, dry voice through the keyhole. And when we stopped running, we were outside our house. The front room was lovely. Balloons floated under the water bottle, gulping gas. Everything was good again and shone over the town. "Perhaps it was a ghost," Jim said. "Well, perhaps it was trolls," Dan said, who was always reading. "Oh, let's go in and see if there's any jelly left," Jack said. And we did that. Always on Christmas night, there was music. An uncle played the fiddle, a cousin sang Cherry Ripe, and another uncle played Drake's drum. It was very warm in the little house. Auntie Hannah who had got onto the parsnip wine, sang a song about bleeding hearts and death, and then another in which she said her heart was like a bird's nest. Then everyone laughed again, and then I went to bed. Looking through my bedroom window out into the unending night and smoke-colored snow, I could see the lights coming from all of the houses on our hill, and I could hear the music rising from them up the long and steadily falling night. I got into bed. I turned the gas down. I said some words to the close and holy darkness, and then I slept. And that was A Child's Christmas in Wales by Dylan Thomas. And as I told you earlier, I'm recording this in Manila. It's very warm here, no snow at all. And Christmas, for most people, has a snow theme. You have Santa riding his sleigh, the reindeer towing him along, delivering the gifts and the smoke coming out of the chimneys and all of the imagery that we experienced with A Child's Christmas in Wales. And whenever I think of Christmas, I think of growing up in western North Carolina, wintertime, no leaves on the trees, snow sometimes on the ground, although we didn't always have a white Christmas, but we always had cold and we always had fires. And I remember the stockings for my brother David and Sammy and my sister Nancy, and for me, our names were on the stockings, and they were hanging above the fireplace. And yet, when you stop to think about it, Christmas Day, December the 25th, in many parts of the world, has absolutely no snow. Below the equator, it's summertime, so Christmas is a summertime holiday. It's not a wintertime holiday. So there might be some snow in some parts of the southern hemisphere. Antarctica has snow, but a lot of it you have summer. And then if you move above the equator, you move into Central America and into the Caribbean and wherever else around the world, like where I am here in Manila, which is above the equator, and yet it's still warm. So most of the world experiences December the 25th as a warm day, not as a cold, blustery winter's day. And yet we always think of Christmas and the snow. And here in Manila, I'm dreaming of a white Christmas. You can hear it in all of the coffee shops. And it does bring some kind of sentimentality to the whole idea of Christmas, which I like. And yet I am a bit amused sometimes when I think about how much warmth is there during Christmas. So perhaps the Christmas fires are trying to warm the place. And yet in a lot of the world, Honolulu, for example, it's already warm. And yet the cheer, why not have a bit of cheer on the holiday season? Speaking of cheer, if you've been listening to this show, you've often heard me mention the Green Door on Carolina Lane, the center for the Poetry Slam in the early 90s. It was an experimental place, and the reason I bring that up is because at Christmas time, Alan Wolf, the MC, would wrap himself in Christmas lights, and while all of the Christmas lights were flashing, Alan would perform A Visit from St. Nicholas, which is also known as 'Twas the Night Before Christmas, by Clement Clark Moore. It was always great fun. Alan had such a great time flashing on the stage, reciting 'Twas the Night Before Christmas went all through the house, and on it goes. You probably know the poem, and what I'm getting ready to do, you probably already guessed, is to offer that poem to you right now. Although I am not wrapped in Christmas lights, nor am I flashing, and I am in Manila, and it's warm, I still can imagine Santa Claus coming, St. Nicholas arriving in his sleigh. So without being wrapped in flashing Christmas lights, and also performing this from Manila where there is no snow, I would like to offer you my version of Clement Clark Moore's A Visit from St. Nicholas. 'Twas the night before Christmas, when all through the house not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse. The stockings were hung by the chimney with care, in hopes that St. Nicholas would soon be there. The children were nestled all snug in their beds, while visions of sugar plums danced in their heads. And Mama in her kerchief and I in my cap had just settled our brains for a long winter's nap, when out on the lawn there arose such a clatter, I sprang from my bed to see what was the matter. Away to the window I flew like a flash, tore open the shutters, and threw up the sash. The moon on the breast of the new fallen snow gave a luster of midday to the objects below, when what to my wondering eyes did appear but a miniature sleigh and 8 tiny reindeer, with a little old driver so lively and quick, I knew in a moment he must be Saint Nick. More rapid than eagles his coursers they came, and he whistled and shouted and called them by name. Now Dasher, now Dancer, now Prancer and Vixen, on Comet, on Cupid, on Donder and Blitzen to the top of the porch, to the top of the wall. Now dash away, dash away, dash away all. As leaves that before the wild hurricane fly when they meet with an obstacle, mount to the sky, so up to the housetop the coursers they flew, with the sleigh full of toys, and St. Nicholas too. And then, in a twinkling, I heard on the roof the prancing and pawing of each little hoof. As I drew in my head and was turning around, down the chimney St. Nicholas came with a bound. He was dressed all in fur from his head to his foot, and his clothes were all tarnished with ashes and soot. A bundle of toys he had flung on his back, and he looked like a peddler just opening his pack. His eyes, how they twinkled, his dimples, how merry. His cheeks were like roses. His nose was like a cherry. His droll little mouth was drawn up like a bow, and the beard on his chin was as white as the snow. The stump of a pipe he held tight in his teeth, and the smoke, it encircled his head like a wreath. He had a broad face and a little round belly that shook when he laughed, like a bowlful of jelly. He was chubby and plump, a right jolly old elf, and I laughed when I saw him, in spite of myself. A wink of his eye and a twist of his head soon gave me to know I had nothing to dread. He spoke not a word, but went straight to his work, and filled all the stockings, then turned with a jerk, and laying his finger aside of his nose, and giving a nod, up the chimney he rose. He sprang to his sleigh, to his team gave a whistle, and away they all flew like the down of a thistle. But I heard him exclaim, ere he drove out of sight, "Happy Christmas to all, and to all a good night." And that, my friends, was a visit from St. Nicholas by Clement Clark Moore. I remember when I was a boy, my father shot the 8mm home movies, and he was always shooting movies, and he was always sending the film off to be developed, and it would come back 3 or 4 weeks later, and we would have an evening showing of the movies he had made. And he actually made movies with openings and closings starring Jimmy and David. I was known as Jimmy back then. So late one January, 1 month after Christmas, my father announced he was going to prove to us Santa Claus existed. And we were so excited. We wanted to know, well, how will you prove that? He said, I hid behind the chair and I filmed Santa Claus when he came to visit our house. And oh, that undid us. We were ready for the proof. So after supper, my father went into the living room where the Christmas stockings had been removed and the tree no longer sat. He put the movie screen up, set up the 8mm projector, took the film in a ceremonial sort of way out of the box, loaded it onto the projector, So my brother David and I sat there with our eyes wide. My little sister Nancy was there. My younger brother Sammy was there. And we were waiting for the proof. And my father clicked the button. The light shone through the film. And there on the big screen, coming into our house, through the front door, not down the chimney, Santa Claus in all of his glory. He waved at the camera because apparently my father didn't hide as well as he'd like to. He ate some cookies. He drank some hot chocolate. He put the presents out, and then he left, waving as he closed the door behind him. And my father showed this movie, and he said, "There's the proof. Santa exists." Now, the reason I can remember that movie so well is because years later, my brother David took all of those 8mm films and had them digitalized. So I have that movie in my files right now, and I just recently viewed it. Well, guess what? Santa Claus, I hate to break the news to you, was Uncle Johnny, who lived one door down in the big 2-story house at the end of the hedge, which ran along the last part of our road, Pine Lane, and stopped in front of Uncle Johnny's house. I don't remember how long it took me to figure out it was Uncle Johnny in the movies. But I do know for a couple of Christmases after that, I was absolutely convinced Santa was showing up, walking through the door, and putting all of those presents out on the floor, including the electric train I once got. That was similar to the easy hobby games for little engineers in A Child's Christmas in Wales. I had trouble putting it all together. I think my father finally helped me assemble it. And finally, the train ran round and round. And that train is also in some of those home movies. So I do know for sure that it existed. And we had little coonskin caps and toy guns. And we ran around. And I don't know, 5, 6 years old. Just like A Child's Christmas in Wales. I don't remember whether the Christmases happened in the house when my father was filming when I was 5 or 6 or 12, but I do know I still have all those old movies, and there was great joy during that time, absolutely for sure. And I think I may have memorized A Child's Christmas in Wales all of those years ago, just to allow me to remember back to my own experiences on Pine Lane and Christmas. And back when we were celebrating Christmas on Pine Lane, we were way out in the country. And now it's not so far out in the country. Where I grew up is where Brevard Road and Interstate 26 cross, just outside of Asheville, really about 6 or 7 miles. But back then it was really country. And beyond our front porch, the lawn ran down under these tall pine trees, sloped down a field, crossed over a dirt road, and then went back up into what we call Mr. Stevens' pasture. And so what I would like to do is close with a poem written by Robert Frost titled Christmas Trees, a Christmas Circular Letter. And it's, my way of saying Happy Christmas to you. It's also my way of remembering Mr. Stevens' field. Now, Mr. Stevens didn't have all that many trees planted in the field. I do remember occasionally there was a horse there, maybe a cow, but we used to traverse that field as boys, going into the woods and coming back out of the woods. And I remember thinking Mr. Stevens' field was so beautiful, and there were some scrubby pines in the field. But I always think of it as a beautiful field full of lush green pine trees and whatnot. And I imagine this is a similar feel to the field that we now have in the poem I'm going to do by Robert Frost, Christmas Trees, a Christmas Circular Letter. And it's about a man being approached from somebody who lives in the city, and the man coming from the city approaches the countryman and wants the countryman to sell his Christmas trees. And the countryman decides, will I sell or will I keep? And here's what happens. Christmas Trees by Robert Frost. The city had withdrawn into itself and left at last the country to the country. When between whirls of snow not come to lie, and whirls of foliage not yet laid, there drove a stranger to our yard, who looked the city, yet did in country fashion, in that there he sat and waited till he drew us out a buttoning coats to ask him who he was. He proved to be the city come again, to look for something it had left behind, and could not do without to keep its Christmas. He asked if I would sell my Christmas trees, my woods, the young fir balsams, like a place where houses all are churches and have spires. I hadn't thought of them as Christmas trees. I doubt if I was tempted for a moment to sell them off their feet to go in cars and leave the slope behind the house all bare, where the sun shines now no warmer than the moon. I'd hate to have them know it if I was. Yet more, I'd hate to hold my trees, except as others hold theirs, or refuse for them beyond the time of profitable growth, the trial by market everything must come to. I dallied so much with the thought of selling, then whether from mistaken courtesy and fear of seeming short of speech, or whether from hope of hearing good of what was mine, I said, "There aren't enough to be worthwhile. I could soon tell you how many they would cut. You let me look them over. You could look, but don't expect I'm going to let you have them." Pasture they spring in, some in clumps too close that lop each other of boughs, but not a few, quite solitary and having equal boughs all round and round. The latter he nodded yes to, or paused to say, beneath some lovelier one with a buyer's moderation, "Well, that would do." I thought so too, but wasn't there to say so. We climbed the pasture on the south, crossed over, and came down on the north. He said, 1,000. 1,000 Christmas trees, at what apiece? He felt some need of softening that to me. 1,000 Christmas trees would come to $30. Then I was certain I had never meant to let him have them. Never show surprise. But $30 seemed so small beside the extent of pasture I should strip. 3 cents. So small beside the dollar friends I should be writing to within the hour would pay in cities for good trees like those. Regular vestry trees whole Sunday schools could hang enough on to pick off enough. 1,000 Christmas trees I didn't know I had, worth 3 cents more to give away than sell, as may be shown by a simple calculation. Too bad I couldn't lay one in a letter. I can't help wishing I could send you one, in wishing you herewith a Merry Christmas. That was Christmas Trees, a Christmas circular letter by Robert Frost. At the end of the poem, when he says, 1,000 Christmas trees I didn't know I had, worth 3 cents more to give away than sell, as may be shown by a simple calculation. And the calculation is this: the Christmas trees were worth 3 cents apiece. It cost 6 cents to mail a letter, so the letter is 3 cents more than the Christmas tree. So why not leave the Christmas trees where they have always been, on the hill to be enjoyed year-round, rather than just for one season? I don't remember how much stamps cost back when I was growing up on Pine Lane. I imagine 6 cents would have been about right. I do remember my grandmother wrote letters, and I do remember how much I loved to check the mail, especially around Christmas time when all the Christmas cards came. I thought this was going to be our last poem, but I do have time for one very short poem. And so, on the theme of Robert Frost, here's one that you are familiar with, and I definitely will close with this one. It's titled, Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening. Whose woods these are? I think I know. His house is in the village, though he will not see me stopping here to watch his woods fill up with snow. My little horse must think it queer to stop without a farmhouse near, between the woods and frozen lake. the darkest evening of the year, he gives his harness bells a shake to ask if there's some mistake. The only other sounds the sweep of easy wind and downy flake. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. And that was Robert Frost's poem, Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening. And I do have one other little treat for you. It's a song that's an old standard sung by a fellow named Marvin Parks, who's a jazz singer who lives in Paris. I think he's from Ohio, actually. And I love this song. He gave it to me years ago, and I keep it on file and try to play it every Christmas. So here's Marvin Parks singing Chestnuts Roasting on an Open Fire.
Chestnuts roasting on an open fire, Jack Frost nipping at your nose, Yuletide carols being sung by a choir, and folks dressed up like Eskimos. Everybody knows a turkey and some mistletoe help to make the season bright. Tiny tots with their eyes all aglow will find it hard to sleep tonight. They know that Santa's on his way. He's loaded lots of toys and goodies on his sleigh. And every mother's child is gonna spy to see if reindeer really know how to fly. And so I'm offering this simple phrase to kids from 1 to 92. Although it's been said many times, many ways, Merry Christmas to you. Kids from 1 to 92. Although it's been said many times, many ways, Merry Christmas to you. Very Merry Christmas, yeah. Have a Merry Christmas. La-ba-ba, la-da-da, 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 la-da-da. Oh-beep-dee-la-doo-ba-ba. Sholi-dodi-dra-dee-dee-dee-da-da-da. Yeah, yeah. Very merry, very merry. Show did it do do show bobo be do 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 da ba do did I oh yeah hey yeah Merry Merry Christmas to you.
And that was Marvin Park singing Chestnuts Roasting on an Open Fire, or Chestnuts, I think maybe is actually the title of the song. So that brings us to the end of our time together. Thank you ever so much for tuning in to Twice 5 Miles Radio, fertile ground for conversations worth listening to and remembering. I'm your host, James Nave, always airing first on WPVM-LP Asheville, 103.7, and streaming online, WPVM-FM.org, the voice of Asheville, heard all over the world, and on other community radio stations like KCEI, Cultural Energy Radio out of Taos, New Mexico. Thank you, Walter Parks, for our theme song, walterparks.com. For more on Walter's music, Devine Dial. Thank you for managing WPVM-FM in Asheville, and Robin Collier for doing the same with KCEI, Cultural Energy Radio in Taos. You can always reach me, Navé, at jamesnave.com. Navé is spelled N-A-V-E. And I'd like to remind you we're sponsored by the Imaginative Storm Writing Project. If you'd like to improve your writing chops, imaginativestorm.com is a good place to look. And so that's about it for now, my friends. Have a fantastic holiday. If you're listening to this on WPVM-FM or KCEI, we've arrived at the weekend just before Christmas. So if you're celebrating the Christmas holiday, Merry Christmas to you, and I hope you enjoy your day and all the rest that happens. And meanwhile, lean into the world, and until next time, maybe I'll catch you on that turnaround somewhere down the line.